Imagine there are 5 people around a riverbank, and they're all looking at a stone that is half submerged into the riverbank. And all these 5 people are standing at different points around the riverbank. And through the riverbank, and depending on the perspective, to each person, one perspective may see the rock as flat. One other perspective may see the rock as round. And the other may see that there's moss on this one side. And the other person over here can't see the moss growing on that side. You get the point, etc., etc. Well, who exactly is right in this situation? Because they can all agree that there's a rock there, but they don't all agree that there's some kind of symbolic or actual thing regarding the rock in of itself. So depending on the individual time within the timeline of perceiving the riverbank of these people, they are going to see a certain type of lens of truth, or reality rather. It's not truth, because it is true that all these perspectives, like there is moss on the rock, right? There is truth to the fact that there's maybe a flat looking edge, or that there's a round looking edge to the rock. It's true that there's perspectives like this, but just because it's true that there's a reality to it doesn't make the reality true. So where am I going with this? My point is that you can have perspectives of the same thing as someone else, and just because you can agree with somebody else on that perspective doesn't actually make the thing true. And likewise, just because you see something a certain way doesn't really make you right, just because you're rebelling and seeing it a particular type of way. Maybe you're all right in your own way, or maybe you're all wrong in your own way. Nobody's really fully right, nobody's really fully wrong. So this is a great metaphor to the way in which I see godliness, and how on this path there are going to be many ways to perceive the same type of reality, but depending on our individual timelines, we're going to see it differently. And it doesn't necessarily mean that one is absolutely right. It doesn't mean that one's absolutely wrong. It just means that there can be realness to the perspective, and there can be truth to the perspective, but it doesn't make it completely true, or doesn't make it completely not real. So this is why you're not really doing anything wrong. In this domain, this physical domain, this reality that we live in, I used to be very astutely rigorous in my regard to avoiding terms like the simulation, because a lot of people think that that's like a computerized system, and to a degree it perhaps is, but I don't think that the simulation that we're living through is necessarily what people think that it is. And so I've steered away from terms like simulation, because it's got a negative undertone for me personally. And again, that's my individual time. Maybe in your individual time, we're seeing the same event in event time, but we're not necessarily understanding the perspectives. So that's what I mean by the simulation, because through this thought experiment, we can clearly see that you don't have to be fully right or fully wrong to acknowledge that there's truthfulness to certain perspectives, even though, and there's a realness to it, like there's real perspectives. But what does this also say about our reality and the simulation? Whenever I use the term reality and simulation, it's going to be, well, the term reality is often going to mean simulation, because I don't see reality as truth. I see truth as something beyond reality. And this is one of the reasons why I see so many people who think that they know things about spirituality. They think that they know things. Oh, like I know, okay, and you're the one to proclaim like this destiny. It's almost like a martyr complex. And I know this because I went through this phase before I started to really. This is where the semantics get kind of rough, because I started to follow Christ over 4 years ago, but as of the last 2 months, I don't even want to say that I follow Christ anymore. I just want to say that I aim to live in the truth and let die what is false. Because Christ, in my internal vocabulary, is a symbolic reference to truth, whereas Christ in another person's internal vocabulary or dictionary might mean something totally different. And so this is why defining terms is going to be very useful, and being able to acknowledge that there are different perspectives to that rock in the middle of the riverbank, right? Like there are different perspectives of the same thing, and it could all be true if you just maybe you're just not seeing it a certain way. And so I think that any person who is an absolutist is, well, it's kind of like Obi-Wan in Star Wars when he's like, only a Sith deals in absolutes. Ironically, that's an absolute, right? But also, I think there's a lot of truth to that, because you can look at that as a different type of frame of, well, whoever dabbles in the dark arts or the dark spirituality deals in absolutes. They might not even know that they're dealing in dark spirituality, because there is like a path of goodness and a path of darkness or evil. But once you move beyond that, once you see that that rock is true, like everybody around the riverbank can see that that rock is a rock. I might not agree with you on what the rock looks like or how it looks, but we can all agree that there's a rock. So that's the beyond good and evil approach, is that you don't have to see good and evil all the time. The battle of good and evil is an illusion. That's exactly what demonstrates in the story of Adam and Eve. If you look at it as a literary piece, it demonstrates that you looking at the Adam and Eve story, you see yourself in it, because you're the one that succumbed to the battle of good and evil as soon as you thought that there was. Before that, you didn't even need to know about good and evil. You didn't need to know. But now that you know that there is, it almost like puts you in a state where you're almost trapped in the realm between good and evil. And it's only when you can look beyond the good and evil, like what Nietzsche talked about, and you can say, that's a rock. We can all agree that that's a rock. We can all agree that there is something. It doesn't really matter how we perceive it. Like it does, but it doesn't. It's the paradox of life. But we can see that that is something that is. This is the isness that I've been referring to recently in my videos, is that there's an isness that is truthfulness. And that isness is what matters. It is not necessarily the perspective, because that means that our reality is based on observation. It's like the old-fashioned, well, if there's a tree that falls in the forest, does it really make a sound? Well, who's to say that the tree actually fell anyway? You don't even know if the tree fell until it's observed. This is why the light slit experiment, for example, is so fascinating. For those that are not familiar with the light slit experiment, it's essentially where they put a beam of light through slits, and they observe the particles of the light and how the particles act as waves when it comes to light, which means that there are particles that are in the light that are not necessarily real until the particles of light are observed. So you can think about this. Consider you've been playing a game like Skyrim or Zelda, for example. You don't really know that there's a monster on the other side of the cave or on the other side of whatever until you see it. Just like you don't really know, maybe there's some person at a tavern that you're supposed to talk to down the line in the game, right? And that person that you could have talked to for so long, who was right there the whole time, and maybe you've gone in and out of that tavern, so to speak, right? I'm speaking metaphorically here, but also it can be applied to our real lives. You have moved in and out of this tavern. That one person, that NPC character is always there, but you don't necessarily know that you need to talk to that NPC character until you talk to them, until you need to. And then you realize maybe you've made it who knows how long toward the game, and many hours played or whatever the case may be, right? And now you realize, oh, I could have just talked to this person the whole time. Now, this does not change the fact that that NPC is a phenomenon in our existence, in our reality. However, it does shape our own individual timeline to associate with that other timeline that is multi-universal or universal in its timeline-ness. So the NPC is operating on the universal timeline. It is a phenomenon of existence. The NPC is not something to negate. A lot of people who claim to be spiritually awakened are now saying stuff like, oh, I wish I was asleep, like the NPCs. It's like, I don't think you really do. Or I think that you might be a spiritual idiot claiming to be awakened. You're a spiritual idiot dressed in drag as an enlightened person. And that's very dangerous. And I know this because I was once that person. I was once the spiritual ego that really just, it needed to teach. And I associated my own sense of knowledge with, oh, I have to share this. I have to. Well, because I know things now. I know things. And I can help other people. I can teach other people. But again, it's that martyr complex that part of us yearns to have that hero embedded into our individual timeline in the hopes that we become the universal timeline or the multiversal timeline. And in fact, the proper stance to take is to let go. But letting go of that spiritual ego is very challenging. And the reason why it's so challenging is because you have to realize that the circumference of knowledge that you have is going to increase. And the more that it increases, the more your circumference of that which is unknown is made available unto you. And so it's almost as if the more that you know about this game of life, the more you realize, the more you can't take it too seriously. You can take it sincerely, absolutely, but to take it seriously is a grave error on behalf of the one who has a spiritual ego, because you have failed to realize that you're just as ordinary as anybody else. And that is one of the reasons why I've had people tell me that, oh, they've tried to flatter me, right? They've tried to flatter, like, oh, you're more than that. You're more than ordinary. It's like, no, I'm not. The only difference between me and you, and I'm not speaking to you necessarily, I'm speaking to the people who are still asleep. The only difference between me and the people that are asleep is that I am capable of not knowing and not needing to know everything. And in that not needing to know everything, my lack of neediness of knowledge, I allow myself to be immersed rather in truth. And when I'm immersed in truth and in truthful time, in that regard, I am therefore allowing my sense of reality and identity to collapse. And that can be a traumatic experience, even to the one who has learned how to let go. Because letting go to immerse yourself in a new form of change is very challenging. It is very difficult. And it is very humbling always, because there's a sense of recognizing that you're really not in control of a whole lot at all. And the only thing that you can control really is your internal state. For example, my self-talk this morning, as soon as I woke up to go to the gym, I immediately caught myself by wanting to sleep in, because I didn't necessarily sleep all that well last night. And yet I had things to do today. I still do. I have projects that I am aiming to accomplish. I have pieces of life and timelines that I need to pursue and to let live and let die. I am on a mission to revolutionize psychology and spirituality, but I also am not attached to that. I'm not attached to it. And that can be very challenging, because it might happen in ways where you think your mission is not actually happening the way that you thought it should be. And I know for me, myself, that was something that I had to deal with just even recently, where I realized that I had to let go of something that I really didn't want to, because although I wanted to be there, it just simply was not aligned with who I was becoming. And there were other things that were involved as well, but the main thing is that I had to take accountability and responsibility for the progress that I needed and not that I wanted. And that can be very challenging, even to the one who is aware, because it takes great courage to inquire upon oneself the need for change. But overall, the proclivity that we have toward moving towards significance is going to be dependent on our own perspective. It's just like that rock in the riverbank. You might now see a new perspective of that rock, of that purpose. But we are the participators of meaning. We are not the meaning itself. Meaning itself comes from God. Meaning itself comes, well, God is more so the reason why meaning exists at all. But when it comes to the rock, we can all agree that there is a rock. There is something, and that's the isness of life. So you are not wrong for doing really anything. And I'm not saying that you ought to go out and sin your way into oblivion, but I don't even necessarily believe in sin anymore either. And a lot of people that are religious will be like, "Oh, he said what?" The thing is that sin only exists because you think it does. The mere act of believing in sin puts you on a timeline that is going to collapse upon itself anyway. So I'm not necessarily saying that you shouldn't sin, but I'm not saying that you should sin either. I'm saying that there's a place beyond good and evil, beyond sin and righteousness even, that you can just be godly. You can have a form of godliness emanating from your being radiantly at all times when you operate from a place beyond the mind, because the mind wants to comprehend as much as it can, but unfortunately the mind is really not capable of even speaking on that which is beyond it, because it is beyond it. It is beyond. And when you're operating from that place of beyondness, in isness, that is where things start to align and make sense and really perform without performing. Because again, performance, I mean, you believe that you exist. You believe that your ego is real. This is not to say that a healthy ego is bad. It's not to say that egoism is necessarily evil. It is simply to say that when one regards one's ego as more important than the integration of the darkness to transmute it into light, that's where the issues arise. That's where the problems continue to occur. And you're going to do these things as much as you need to in this life. There really is no wrong way to go, because as long as you're trying to integrate the truth and live the truth and let die what is false, you're going to see the different perspectives. You might be on the riverbank and think to yourself, oh, maybe I'll go over where, I don't know, that person is to see a better look over there. Okay, now I've got some more data points to pay reference to, and now I've got a different way to invest my time. Okay, let me see about this perspective. Okay, well, there's that perspective. The mere act of questioning has become so taboo in many religious ways, and if you can't even ask a question and you're not capable of thinking about things without trying to force someone into belief, I would say that you're not awake at all. So with all that being said, I hope that this message was useful and insightful. If wanting to learn more about these things and wanting to integrate the darkness resonates with you, I encourage you and implore you to look into my Godlike Mastery offer as well as my one-on-one sessions. This is where I'm going to really be able to help people and make a more positive impact. Once again, for those that are maybe not aware, I have been in the process of closing the Regal Change Academy. And again, this is what I was referring to earlier in the video, where I had to let go of something that I thought was aligned with me, but really isn't anymore. It's just not. And I don't want to have to close it, but at this time, it is as if I have to, for the sake of being aligned within my spirit. So that's why I'm focusing more on the Godlike Mastery offer as well as my one-on-one sessions. But with all that being said, I hope that this message was useful and insightful for you. Once again, peace, and until next time.